Hello? Yeah, Mom. I just got here. Yeah, don't worry. I booked an Uber. Okay. Don't worry. I'll share my live location. As soon as I landed in Ohio to visit my grandparents, my mother called me all worried because it was the first time that I was traveling alone. I mean, come on. Mom needs to take it easy. I know it's my first time traveling to another state, but I used to travel alone in my hometown all the time. So as I told my mom I'd already booked myself a ride that was supposed to be there any minute, I checked again on the Uber app and it said, "Sorry, your ride might be delayed due to some inconvenience from our side." I checked the time and it was 11:49 p.m. I thought it'd be best to wait till the ride arrived, so I sat down on an empty bench in front of the airport. As I was waiting for the Uber, I noticed two drunk guys passing by and turning over in my direction. I got scared by the thought of them molesting me, so I immediately got up and started walking in the opposite direction. At the same time, I saw the Uber car stop in front of me. I double checked and it was my ride, so I immediately got in. "Are you okay, ma'am?" The driver noticed me all panicked, so he asked. "Yes, I'm fine. Don't worry, just drive me to the destination, please." I replied with a bit of a cold tone, which he sensed and started driving. The rest of the ride he was completely silent. There was something that I noticed in his car, and it was the faint smell of blood. How did I notice this even though it was faint? Well, I work in a hospital as a nurse, so I come across blood all the time. That's how I easily recognized it. It felt a bit creepy and weird to me, so I kept thinking about all the possibilities of the blood spilling in his car. There was this possibility that he may have gotten hurt or made an accident while driving, or he was a serial killer who could have killed someone in the car. As I was thinking all this, the car stopped and the driver told me that we have reached our destination. I absentmindedly got off and walked into my grandparents' house. He drove off and I thought that it must be my imagination because working in a hospital and always being around blood had made my nose sensitive. I thought of calling my mom and informing her about my arrival, but then I realized that my purse was missing. Even after looking for it through everything, my stuff and all, I could not find it. Now, there was only one possibility that I left my purse inside the cab, and I had no way to contact the driver because I remember putting my phone inside my purse when I was getting in the car, and the driver's details were inside the car as well. It was not just my phone that was inside the car, my credit cards, my passport, and my other identification cards, every important stuff that was in that purse. My grandfather told me that he would try to do something about it and left. Well, my grandmother asked me not to worry and presented side dishes and sweets for me to eat. I had no appetite left to eat anything, but I still ate some, just so that she would not feel bad. Since I did not know much about the town, I had no other choice but to wait for Grandpa to come back. He returned around 4 in the evening and told me that he had reported the police about it, and that they would find it. I knew deep down that it would be no use, and started thinking that I should just forget about my things. I informed Mom about my arrival and my purse being missing, to Grandpa's phone, for which she scolded me to her heart's content. Grandma cooked a nice dinner for us that night, chicken and everything. I thought my purse was gone anyway, so why should I miss out on Grandma's cooking? I ate till my belly started to feel tighten. Trust me, Grandma's cooking is the best, which I could eat without limits. After dinner, she brought dessert, and then I had that. After eating, she guided me upstairs to a room that had an outside view. I opened the window, looked outside, and noticed a car parked in front of Grandma's house. A man was standing outside the car and looking in the direction of our house. I instantly recognized him, and he was the Uber driver. I immediately ran out while Grandma followed me. As I reached the driver, took out a bag and handed it to me. As I was thanking him, I realized the smell of blood was stronger than before. I know I shouldn't think of such a thing at a moment like this, but I still couldn't avoid it. I was thankful for the driver's honesty and the fact that he came back to return my purse to me. The next day, I was playing with Aunt Fry's daughter, and my grandparents were watching the news. Grandma called me to show me something. I walked there and looked in the direction of the television where she pointed a finger. The news was broadcasting about an Uber driver going off and killing rapists. I recognized him by the picture. I finally understood the reason behind the blood smell in his car. He was arrested and the investigation was going on. So we followed and continued watching the news for the next few days. It was revealed that he was a single father of a 7-year-old beautiful daughter and earned a living by driving for Uber. One day when he had left his daughter with a nanny and was at work, The nanny along with her daughter were gang raped and murdered. When he returned, he found a very disturbing sight of their bodies which made him tremble and angry to his core. He reported the case to the police, but the police were unable to find the culprits behind the crime. So he decided to take the matters into his own hands and went on a killing spree against the rapists. He'd killed more than 8 people who had raped infants, young women, and elderly ladies. I saw the final news before my departure from my grandparents' house. He was being held on trial and that the murder of his daughter and the nanny were being investigated. One thought that crossed my mind, even though it is not right by law, was, I wish more people like him emerge and kill the inhumane beings and monsters of our lives.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Ghosts? I know we all agree ghosts don't exist, right? Especially not in a crowded place. But 4 years ago, there was this one incident where it was not just me, but others witnessed it too. It was the day I had finally returned to work after taking a vacation. It was my first flight. I was working with the airline as a pilot for the past 6 years, and during those years, I had witnessed many events, even life and death situations, but never an unnatural one. Look who's back from his honeymoon vacation. Isn't it my favorite captain, Mr. Van de Kamp? As soon as Gabby saw me getting ready to fly the plane, she came with her usual cheerful smile. It wasn't a honeymoon, it was just a simple vacation, and you know it, I said with a goofy grin on my face, which she was the reason for. Well, it could have been if you agreed to marry me, she winked, and it made me blush. Stop messing around and go get ready for the flight. I patted her on the head while saying that, and then I walked off to the restroom. The pilot, Matthew Kowalski, reached the aircraft after about 15 minutes of my arrival, and we greeted each other. The two of us weren't best friends or something, but we were still on good terms as coworkers. We waited for the rest of the flight crew to reach the airline, and once they did, they started to check the flight plans and make adjustments as needed, while Matthew, Carl, and I were looking at the route and flight details that were prepared. After that, we calculated the correct amount of fuel needed for the flight and checked the speed and altitude of the aircraft, weather details, and emergency plans. Once pre-flight briefing, inspection, and setup were complete, the flight was ready to be boarded. But before that, we called the crew for a meeting to check if anything was missed for safety or any other thing. They told us everything was fine and there was no further adjustments needed. So we all went to our designated positions to get ready for boarding. Matthew and I took our seats as we were to fly the plane, and the passengers started boarding their flight. That was when Matthew said, "What are these children doing in the cockpit?" His voice grabbed my attention, and I turned near the flight deck to see 2 children were playing around. We asked Carl to ask one of the crew members to take them to their seats. It was dangerous for them to keep playing around the area once the flight would take off. I don't know if Carl asked them or not, but after a few minutes, the children weren't there. So we thought maybe they took them to their seats. Once the boarding was complete and the flight was ready to take off, I saw those kids near the deck. So I called Carl again to ask him why the children were still playing there. But instead of replying, he just gave me a weird look and went back. I looked back, and the children were no longer there. I could not understand what was going on, so I just let it be and started taking off the plane. Once the takeoff was complete, I heard Matthew saying, "They're here again." He was looking at the CCTV, so I looked over, only to see that those 2 kids were back and playing. Why the hell isn't their parents taking care of them? "Call Gabby, she'll take care of them," I said with absolute annoyance. He nodded his head and called for her. "What is it, Captain?" Gabby asked the moment she got in. "Gabby, why are there children playing next to the cockpit door?" Matthew asked her, but she surprisingly laughed. "Sure there are." After saying this, she left. I could not believe she just ignored us and left. It was weird. The children were still playing there, but she went past them as if she couldn't even see them. It kept bothering us, and that was when she saw one of the captain crew members trying to talk to them, but those children kept ignoring them. He left to ask the passenger whose children they were, but by the time he got back, they were gone. We didn't see them for the rest of the flight, so we concluded that someone may have finally led them back to their seats. After the flight, we went back to the hotel we were staying in for the evening, and Gabby, being Gabby, kept flirting with me as always. It had been on my mind ever since the flight, so I couldn't hold it any longer. Gabby, can I ask you something? Oh my, have you finally decided that you're going to propose? But don't you think this venue is a little... She started babbling and joking. No, this is about something else, I said in a serious tone. What is it, Captain? She noticed me being serious, so she started talking a little normally. It's about what happened on the plane. Why did you ignore us when Matthew asked you about the children? What children? She asked in a confused voice. The children who were playing near the cockpit door, I said with equal confusion about why she didn't remember when she walked right past them. They were pretty hard to notice. Sorry, but I ignored it because I thought you guys were pulling a prank on me. There were no children in the galley near the cockpit door at the time. I stopped in my tracks as she said that, and turned to see Matthew, who was having the same reaction as me. Gabby was just as confused. We asked Carl about them too, because he was there too when we first saw them, but he replied similarly to Gabby, and said he also just thought we were pulling some sort of lame prank on him. We checked the CCTV footage again. There were no recordings of children there any time. Nothing like that ever happened again. But those of us who witnessed them believe in ghosts now, just as strongly as we believe in death. Back in 2004, me and the wife decided we couldn't face freezing our bits off for yet another British winter, and started looking for a more tropical location to spend the festive period. We were working on a bit of a budget and couldn't quite afford the Thai or Vietnamese beaches we'd had our hearts set on. But after a little bit of searching, we came across this lovely little beachside bed and breakfast in a little town called Galle on the southwestern coast of Sri Lanka. It was definitely priced a budget hotel, but the photos the owners had taken showed it to be quaint, clean, and beautiful little place. And once my wife was taken with it, I had very little choice in the matter. So I made a booking. The food was amazing. The people were welcoming, and the beaches were everything we could have hoped for. Come Christmas Day, we had the most unusual Christmas dinner of our lives, sharing a veritable banquet of different dolls and curries in a local restaurant. And it was so good that neither of us missed pigs in blankets that year. And I'm sure most of you will agree that's really saying something. We finished off with a few drinks on the beach, stuffing every so often to giggle at how surreal it all was. Then we were sunbathing on Christmas Day. Then, once we were drowsy enough, we headed off to bed for an early night. The next morning was even better. No hangovers, no dodgy leftovers to work through, no going down the local park in the freezing cold to pretend that a brisk Boxing Day walk is anything but an absolute bollock. Just sun, seas, sandy beaches for 5 more days. Me and the wife replaced the horrid Boxing Day park walk with drinks and nibbles in the beachside cafe, nibbling on dips and papadums, wondering how we were going to readjust to life back in the UK again. I mean, it had been literal paradise for almost a full fortnight. We could have never have possibly guessed in that moment. Then, our festive little Asian trip would turn out to be the biggest mistake of our lives. But we soon learned that a dream day
can turn into a living nightmare in just a matter of minutes. So we're just sitting there in the open-air restaurant, holding hands, both enjoying that lovely rhythmic sound of the waves gently breaking against the beach. And suddenly, it stopped. We heard that big rush as the water was pulled back away from the shore, but no crash followed. And me and my wife watched as the water crept further and further back away from the shore. And I don't mean like a few feet or anything. It just kept going and going until you could barely see the edge anymore. And there was only wet sands as far as the eye could see. I distinctly remember the moment I saw these tiny specks on the wet sand in the distance. And now it almost looked like they were jumping up and down. Only that's exactly what they were doing. They were fish that had been swimming in the shallows when the water had just disappeared. Now they were flapping around in the sand, gasping for breath. I turned to see the young waitress standing behind us. Now I'm about to ask her what was happening, but her face told me all I needed to know. She was golfing even harder than we were and had obviously never seen anything like it in her life. The next thing I know, there are people running out onto the wet sand with plastic bags, scooping up the fish into them before moving on to the next port flounder. It was actually quite amusing for a moment, thinking it must have been the easiest morning's fishing that any of them had ever experienced. But the next moment, I hear this absolute roar of a shout coming from down the beach. An older man was bellowing something out to the lad scooping up fish. Then he turns and starts shouting with his hands kept around his mouth, like he's trying to announce something to everyone. I turned around to the Sri Lankan waitress to ask what was being said, but by that time, her dad showed up, the cafe owner I later found out, and he has this horrified look on his face. I could tell he was looking out to sea, so I turned to see what he was looking at. And that's when I saw that the water was starting to come back in. Only it wasn't returning as gently as it had rescinded. It was getting faster and faster, and the way he was getting bigger and bigger. "Sir, madam, please come upstairs," I remember the owner saying. Suddenly, there was a big wave coming. A very big wave. "We must all go upstairs now. Very fast, please." The cafe was basically a big hollowed-out concrete block, so I was confident that we would indeed be safe if we went upstairs where there was another open-air dining area. The only trouble was getting everyone up there, as the owner's elderly mother was confined to a wheelchair. I didn't actually see her at first. She was in another room when we all started to move. So I was halfway up the stairs by the time I saw the owner wheeling her to the bottom. It was honestly one of the most horrifying moments in my life. This horrendous, oh no moment. Because the guy was trying to pull her up the stairs backwards in the wheelchair, but he clearly didn't have the strength to do it on his own. I basically pushed my wife up the stairs and then forced my way back down them towards where the owner was struggling with his mom. I grabbed one handle, and he grabbed the other. But that wasn't working. So we tried actually carrying the whole thing by grabbing the wheel spokes. But again, that wasn't working. The whole time, I could hear the wave getting closer and closer. My poor wife from the top floor saying, oh my God," as it's getting nearer to break. Then it struck. We didn't have the owner's mom up as high as we needed, and all this water and debris came crashing over us. It was pure chaos for a second. I was grabbing onto the banister into someone's arm or leg. I couldn't tell who was just holding on for dear life. All of a sudden, the water level drops a bit, but it's still rushing past us. This lets me see that I've got hold of the owner's arm while he has hold of his mother's hands. The wheelchair was nowhere to be seen, like it was there one moment, gone. The next just dragged away by what turned out to be a 15-foot-high tsunami. I'm sorry if my reading starts to take a turn at this point. Remember, all of this is really, really painful, and I'm sure you understand why in just a moment. So I'm pulling with all my might, trying to keep the owner, and by proxy his mom, from being washed away. That was just too heavy for me to drag out of the water. And I'm actually struggling to hold on to myself. So I'm absolutely terrified that I'm going to lose grip, which not only do I die, but they die too. I can't even express how ashamed I am to say this, but there was a moment when I thought about just letting go. I know that sounds absolutely soulless, but the kind of terror I felt at that moment, I'd never experienced anything like it in my life. It was like something else just took over for a moment. Screw everyone, but my kind of attitude that placed my life above all else. But even in that moment, I knew I wouldn't be able to live with myself. It just seemed out of the question. If I lose grip on them, if they get ripped away from me, that's different. But for me to just let go seemed a bit too much like murder for me to go through with it. Next thing, I'm snapped out of that horrible moment by screaming from the owner and his mom. They're saying things to each other in their language, so I don't have a clue what they're saying. I thought I could pretty much guess that. They'd be saying, "Don't let go. I don't want to die. I won't let you go, Mom." Stuff like that, but then I'm choking up as I write this. The owner suddenly let go of his mom's hand, and that she might have slipped or something. But the way he turned so purposefully and ran back up the stairs, I knew that he just let her go. I was stunned, absolutely stunned. But as I said, I'm just in survival mode. So I'm following him up the stairs to the safety of the top floor. I feel my wife bear hug me with this full body impact before she burst into tears. It hadn't occurred to me, but because she hadn't been able to see what I was doing, she thought I had been washed away. She's crying and screaming at me, "Where did you go?" I swear I wanted to tell her, but I just couldn't. Instead, I looked over the edge of the open-top dining area, and I just gasped at the utter destruction below us. The entire landscape had been completely transformed. It was almost unrecognizable, and the water just kept going and going inland, never slowing down, never stopping. I remember the moment I realized that could have been happening to the entire island. Just miles and miles of coastline, completely and utterly destroyed in just a few minutes. Although it was bad enough when the water was coming in, it was even worse as the tide dragged it back out again, because all the death and destruction that was caused bulldozing its way inland, it was pulled back past us as the water returned to the ocean. There were so many bodies. I lost count. Every other second, you'd see a patch of pink or brown flesh floating on the surface, maybe a streak of color from someone's clothing. There were so many dead. Someone who just didn't see it coming. But the hardest part for me to bear was yet to come. When the majority of the danger had passed and it was just stagnant water on the floor below us, The owner and one of his sons ventured downstairs to bring up what little food and what otter they could salvage from the flooded kitchen. We knew rescue wouldn't be quick, and people already working their way through the mess outside, pulling out dead bodies and survivors. Like, me and my wife pitched in as best we could. But the fact remains that there just wasn't much we could do at that stage, other than try to comfort the handful of people with us Sri Lankans included the night. None of us could sleep, even with the free beer that the owner had given us. So when I saw him smoking a cigarette in the darkness on his own, I thought I might give him a bit of company. I hadn't smoked since I first tried in sixth form college, but the night I asked him for a smoke, and we shared a beer in a second silence. Then, out of nowhere, he says, "I didn't want to let her go. I didn't even really know what to say to that." I know he was referring to his mom, but I didn't know if he was just trying to rationalize it or what. So I just nodded. I told him, I know. But he shook his head. He goes on to tell me that his mom had told him to let her go. She knew I couldn't pull them both in. She also knew that it wouldn't be long before we'd all be dragged off. So she sacrificed herself for us. The owner told me what their little exchange had been, and I swear to God, it almost broke me. He said it went something like this. "Let me go, son. Let me go." "No, Mom, you'll drown." "You don't let me go, wild trout. Just hold on. I've had a long life. I've had a good life. You've been a good son, and you made me very proud. But your family, your needs to take care of Deuce. I tell you, I love you, Mom. I love you too. Goodbye." He said he couldn't bring himself to say goodbye. So he just let her go. Turned and went to look after his family, just like his mama told him to. This all happened nearly 16 years ago, and I still can't talk or think about it without tearing up. I can't even imagine being in that situation. And just knowing it happened was completely traumatizing. So God only knows how he actually dealt with it himself. I think that's why this has been so helpful to type up. I can't really talk to anyone about what happened that day. People beside the wife anyway. Either get frustrated that they don't understand, or if they ask too many questions, or worst case scenario, I start thinking about the owner's mom. I choke up, and then there's no more talking at all. So rather than suffering the embarrassment of being a grown man in tears, I just shut my mouth and tried to deal with it. But I don't really think there is anything to deal with. I think to an extent that trauma just becomes a part of you. It doesn't hurt anyone. It's not debilitating, but it's always there. Like the scar left after a deep wound. You just learn to live with it.